Welcome to the Introduction to Philosophy. We're going to survey some of the major categories in philosophy, some of the major questions, and talk about some basics. Alright, it's 1st of June 2017. And we'll mention, let's just jump in. Prolegomena, this is the work we have to do before we start. We have to ask, what is philosophy? And we'll look at 4 major categories. And then we'll look at metaphysics, epistemology, logic, value theory, and then philosophy of science, philosophy of religion, and so on. Alright. Plato's Cave, if you want to watch this. Some of you have a discussion board question with Plato's Cave. So you'll read some of this bit of the Republic and post your thoughts. If you're lost, you can look in our session. I've got tons of people have commented on Plato's Cave on YouTube, so just putz around, find something where you can ask questions. Alright. What is philosophy? Why should we think? Why should we think about these things? Some say philosophy is an exploration into the most important questions humans have in life, and also includes the ability to think deeply about them. And this involves a branch of philosophy called logic, where we analyze what is a good argument, what's a strong argument, what's a weak argument, and so on. So some key philosophical questions are this: how should I live? What should I value in life? Should I value good vacations? Go to Hawaii every year over time with my family? I might have to work 80 hours a week to give my family these vacations. Or should I take smaller vacations, just go camping next door, a few miles down the road, and work half as much? What am I? Am I a thing of value? Does my value come from God? Am I born in God's image? Does my value come from the social contract of my society, a useful fiction that all of us participate in? What in the world are human beings? Are we just wonderful meat machines? Do we have souls? Or are we just made of matter and energy? Is the self or the I, the first person, I, second person, you, are these indexicals, illusions? Or is there such a thing as a self and I? This is a big debate between Hindus and Buddhists, between naturalists or scientific atheists and theists, dualists and physicalists. Everybody disagrees on these questions. Also, is there ultimate meaning and purpose in life? Or am I just the equivalent of an ant on an anthill, making up my own purpose in life? I was helping my buddy build a rock planter the other day up in Chicago, and I found 6 different species of ants. Now, all these little ants have their own little universe in this big bonfire that I was grabbing these rocks from. And yeah, what are these ants thinking? What's their purpose? Do they have a purpose in their own minds, or are they just little zombie ants? And are we just the same thing, living on this third rock from the sun in this enormous universe? Are we humans just ants on the anthill called Earth? Also, so a lot of these questions relate to whether or not there is a God. And if God exists, does she care about us? Aristotle's God just is up there thinking thought. Aristotle's God is not a God you can pray to. Aristotle's God was necessary to keep the universe in existence, to keep order, keep design, keep goodness going, causality, but God you couldn't pray to. Augustine, Aquinas, Locke, Newton, they disagreed. They thought God was very personal and actually revealed information to humans through the person of Jesus about what God is like. So yeah, if God exists, did this God give information to humans in the form of prophets or even walking around on the earth and as God himself? If God exists, does this God care about me? Do I owe this God anything? Also, is there something worth dying for? We have to ask this question. Are friends and family worth dying for? Are the freedoms of this country worth dying for? We just had Memorial Day weekend. I watched Saving Private Ryan. And guess what? The stuff I'm going to talk about in this class, I'd be killed for in many countries today. freedom is not free, and in my view, this freedom to talk about these philosophical questions, that is something worth dying for. In the Apology, Socrates says something like this: the unexamined life is not worth living. So his life's mission was to prod people to think, to question, to see what they know and what they don't know. And he thought if people came down to the conclusion that, wow, they know that they should pursue the life of wealth, power, and politics, prestige, he pushed them to try to show them that, no, you know what? Care of your soul, the formation, spiritual formation, and becoming a good, moral, virtuous person, that's more important than riches, power, wealth, and so on. All right, if you believe anything, philosophy has an impact on you. Remember all these questions. Do you have answers to all these questions? Do you have good reasons to believe them? If so, you're already engaged in philosophy. Philosophy is not a spectator sport. We all participate to one degree or another by running our lives on our philosophical beliefs. Yeah, that's one thing I never realized as an undergraduate. I thought philosophy was stupid, a joke, ignorable, until I realized, thanks to Plato 3 years later, no, philosophy rules the lives of every human on this planet. They just don't know it. Now, all of us are wrong about some of our philosophical beliefs. The important question is, do we have the big ones right? Those are the most important questions. As we're going to see when we look at Socrates, the Apology, Euthyphro, Crito, Phaedo, his view of God had a big impact on his ethics, how he chose to live, what he thought about death, and so on, and his political philosophy. So we need to ask, do we have the big questions right? Are we wasting our lives thanks to some false beliefs about ourselves and reality? I love watching these shows on cults. In my history major at Miami University, Oxford, Ohio, I focused on Nazi Germany in the seminars at my major. And political science focused on political decision making. We got to get these good decisions right about human beings. So if you watch shows on cults in Nazi Germany, jihadist Islamism, you'll see other people who bought into false philosophy. I love the one on People's Temple, Jim Jones. HBO had one, and so on. It is obvious that some people waste their lives once they realize, oh, I believed this, I should have valued this, when I really should not have valued this. I left my home in Florida and went to fight with ISIS, and guess what? I should have stayed in college and found a wife and family and grew oranges in Orlando, not going over there to behead people and cause chaos. This is why philosophy is, I would argue, this is the most important class in the academy. This is why we need to learn to think about the most important questions in life. So you might agree with Socrates when he encouraged us to live the examined life and that the unexamined life is not worth living. All right, Tom Morris wrote this book to the right, Philosophy for Dummies. He was at Notre Dame, then he left, and now he's a big shot giving business ethics lectures. And he wrote If Aristotle Ran General Motors, and so on. But let's do some more philosophical questions. You can pick any of these and throw them on the discussion board if you were interested or are interested in one of these questions, and explain exactly why. And if you give a case from your life, that'd be good too. How can we really know anything? This is a question of skepticism and in the domain of epistemology. Can we know anything? What is knowledge? What is the importance of rationality to a good life? What does the word good really mean? Is ethics just a matter of opinion? Is it relative? Or are there real or objective moral rules that are binding on every person? In science fiction and Star Wars universe, we think that you should not betray your friends. Anakin should not betray the Jedi Order, and so on. We're going to have episode 8 coming out soon. And I think personally that the ethics of the Jedi Order was a mess, and I think Luke's going to disband it. That might be a good thing. Why should we be moral? This is a question of Plato's Republic. Are people really free, or are all our actions determined by genetics and environment? Or are they determined by God? Can anyone predict the future in principle in every detail? What's the difference between a human being and a robot? This question of consciousness has been popping up. Ex Machina, Westworld, artificial intelligence, all these different sci-fi things. Do people have souls, non-physical minds, or are we just physically complex organism? What is death? This is a question of thanatology, philosophy of death. Why is death so feared by many people? These are going to come up when we look at Plato's dialogues. Do we somehow still exist after death? Is reincarnation true? Is there heaven and hell? Are we the kinds of things at all who could exist in an afterlife after our bodies decompose? All right. Why does the world contain so much evil? That's going to be an argument against theism, or the belief in God. Can anyone prove what the truth is on such ultimate issues, or must we accept them just as matters of faith? What's the meaning of life? How can people be happy? Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Augustine, these guys all worked on the question of what is ultimate human happiness. I was just at a conference in Memphis a couple months ago with a bunch of my buddies from grad school. And then one of my buddies just yelled out, "None of us are happy. None of us here at this table are happy." And that was interesting to me. And I'm like, we've been dedicating our lives to eudaimonia, the deep happiness, the flourishing life. And yet these guys aren't happy. What are they missing? So, you be the judge. Kierkegaard, Danish philosopher from the 19th century, he was a Christian existentialist. He said philosophy is a search for self-understanding. Socrates, and Pythagoras said philosophy is the love and pursuit of wisdom. Philosophy is the asking of questions about the meaning of our most basic concepts, and it's a search for fundamental beliefs that are rationally justified. So philosophy is a lot of things. Okay, epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge. We ask this: do we know anything? Now, there's global skeptics and local skeptics. Global skeptics are across the board about every form of inquiry in science, religion, history, economics, politics, whatever. The local skeptic is going to just locate skepticism to certain branches of knowledge. So the local skeptic might say, you know what, I'm a skeptic about everything scientific. So whatever scientist said, I don't think we can have knowledge about science. Science changes every 100 years. We come up with new theories, so forget science. Or you might be a local skeptic about religion, and so on. The global skeptic says you don't know anything. She says there are no universal truths. There are no universal narratives. There's just a narrative from this person and that person, and there's no truth of the matter. Now, it's interesting. This word narrative's thrown around all on brainless cable news. This guy's trying to push this narrative. This guy's trying to push this narrative. And what is the truth is the better question. Now, how would you respond to the global skeptic? Do you know some things? If you do, how do you know that you know? Do you have a criterion or method that tells you what a piece of knowledge is versus opinion? Like right now, I am looking at a fountain going off in the lake outside this apartment. I know that there is a fountain and it's operating right now. But do I know that? How do I know that? Now, this is called the problem of the criterion. Now, there's 3 solutions to this. Now, if we were in class, we discuss which one is the right one of this. If you want to bring this up on the discussion board and pick which one you think is best, here it is. Number 1, skepticism. There is no knowledge. That's one route. 2, Methodism. This is where you come up with a criterion that allows us to test things to find knowledge. So René Descartes, that's spelled wrong. That's the female René. John Locke, and so on. These guys said we could find a criterion of knowledge. René Descartes will say, clear and distinct, and so on, and apply it. Now, other people say both of those are false. We have to start with particular cases of knowledge. Because Methodism will will get us into this infinite vicious regress. So particularism solves this problem, they argue. We start with cases of knowledge. Thomas Reid was a particularist. He was a Scottish philosopher who defended libertarian agency and other things. Roderick Chisholm was a 20th century metaphysician, epistemologist. I think he was at Brown University. Dallas Willard, he was at USC, University of Southern California. He passed a few years ago. J.P. Moreland still teaches at Biola University. These guys are particularists. They start with certain cases of knowledge. Like, I know my tire is flat. I know it is morally wrong for me to chop up my kitten and eat her for breakfast. Or I know it is morally wrong to throw the neighbor's puppy into the wood chipper for fun. Whatever. We start with things we know. Moral knowledge, sensory knowledge, and so on. I'd go on more about this, but I'm not. If you want to talk about this problem, post on discussion board and I'll jump in with you. This is important. Nobody knows this. I hear this in lectures, PhD, scientists all the time. You see this on Cosmos, the newest Cosmos with his face, Neil deGrasse Tyson. These guys have no idea about this. You're going to learn more about than these famous people in the next 60 seconds. Philosophy is a second-order discipline. This means that it stands under first-order disciplines like chemistry, biology, physics, history, sociology, medicine, mathematics, and it supports them. And in fact, you cannot do chemistry, biology, physics, history, sociology, medicine, mathematics, unless you have the right philosophical presuppositions in place as a foundation for these sciences. Okay, so the second order discipline of philosophy is under history. You got to know things about human beings. You got to know things about testimony. You got to know things about archaeology in order for history to be done. You have to know certain things about human beings and the way we do science and theories and mathematics, logic, language, concepts, the natural world. You have to assume all this stuff. You have to assume a mountain of things before you can even do any science. Because these philosophical presuppositions are not testable in the lab. They're assumed to do any tests at all. So each first-order discipline relies upon debatable philosophical assumptions. So each discipline in the academy needs philosophy to get off the ground. This is what Neil deGrasse Tyson and these other guys don't get. Because, yeah, the philosopher can always pull rank on the scientist. And philosophy does rule the university, even if 90% of the professors have no idea that this is the case. All right, so some examples of the philosophical presuppositions of science. If you don't assume these 8 things I mentioned here, that there's 20 of them, you can't do any physics, you can't do any chemistry, you can't do any biology. There has to be, number one, an existence of a theory-independent external world that exists apart from our minds, that we're just not inventing. If we're discovering truths about the world, if science is about discovering truths about trees, voltage-gated sodium, potassium ions, whatever. The possibility of language or concepts to describe the world. Because we could be like 2-year-olds describing what's happening in Congress for watching C-SPAN, or a 2-year-old describing what it's like to watch an NFL game. They're going to say all this stuff's going on, but these kids don't have the concepts or the language to describe what's happening on C-SPAN in Congress and whatnot. You have to you assume the existence of logic, logical relations, the Bayesian relation, these types of things. The existence of numbers. Are these things real? If logic and numbers are real, these are very strange things. and they might have to be abstract objects or universals that people can think with. So all of a sudden science is very strange and non-physical, on my view. 5, the existence of objective moral values and ethics. We need to be honest about our data. We can't fudge the data. At some point, it's wrong to ignore anomalous data anymore, and we have to change our theory. So Thomas Kuhn is a great philosopher of science, writes about some of this stuff. That after a certain point, we can live with certain anomalies. There's always going to be anomalous data with anything, but at some point it reaches a critical mass, and to ignore it and not go with a better explanation is going to be a problem, epistemically, in my view. All right, 6, the reliability of our senses as accurate truth gatherers of the world. Humans see green. I'm seeing green, blue sky right now, this water, this fountain, this evergreen. But you know what? If a bat's over here flying around, what's a bat going to see? How do our senses make sense of the noise? Now, I'm what my friend calls a naive direct realist. I actually believe that sensing is a metaphysical view, even though it's mediated by the physical process of wavelengths, retina, optic nerves, visual cortex. But ultimately, seeing green is a metaphysical thing for me. Now, my buddies think I'm insane to go with this Chisholmian view, or Husserl's view, or Dallas Willard's view of perception, but you be the judge. Anyway, bats, cats, dogs, aliens, we all see different things when we look at the world. So how in the world can we trust our senses when we're trying to describe anything out there in the world? 7, possibility of induction, human reason, to make an inference to the best explanation, to make generalizations, because this assumes, number 8, the uniformity of nature to be the same tomorrow as it was yesterday. How can we have laws of nature if nature is like a haunted house and the periodic table is changing every day, and so on? So, what philosophy is not? It's not anthropology. It's not sociology. It's not political science. It's not astronomy. So we've got to be able to distinguish it. So we're going to have to, some of your quiz questions will be to learn the difference between normative philosophical statements. One ought to be X. One ought to report data honestly. That's an ethical claim. And descriptive statements like Sally reported her data honestly. That's descriptive. Okay, William F. Lawhead said, science is not enough. This is a big mistake a lot of people make. So the question, is there more reality than that portion that science can discover? That is not a scientific question. To ask it, we must stand outside science and philosophically discern its limits and range of competence. If it is possible that reality consists of more than the physical world, like God values non-physical minds, then through philosophical reasoning and not through science alone can we learn whether this dimension exists and what it's like. This is the biggest misnomer out there. I hear this on movies all the time. I heard it last night, today, forget, where some guy was like, well, I want science to tell me such and such and such. But if we're making a philosophical determination that ghosts don't exist a priori, or souls don't exist, these are philosophical decisions and questions. They're not scientific. All right, here's an example. Metaphysics of personhood. So all biologists know that we all came into existence as unique living human organisms about 24 hours after conception. Unless you're a twin, then someday before day 11 you came into existence. So all human embryos and fetuses and infants and adults are developing unique living human organisms from fertilization until death. The problem is science does not tell us if these living human organisms are persons or things of value that should be protected from death, and whether or not they have the right to life and liberty and constitutional protections. These are purely philosophical questions. They're not scientific. Science can't tell you whether or not kindergartners are things of value or fetuses or embryos or whatnot. This is purely in the realm of philosophy, and scientists have to just sit down and listen to the philosopher. All right, here's Friedrich Nietzsche on the right, who lived last half of 19th century. After careful thought, will you discover your most cherished beliefs are true or false? Philosophy is an explosive in the presence of which everything is in danger. Now, this summer, 2017, we're going to be reading Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols, How to Philosophize with a Hammer, and the Antichrist, which are his attempts to smash Christian belief. So, we're going to read that. So, personally as a Christian, I don't think he's successful. But as a Christian, and to follow John Stuart Mill, I know I need to read the best arguments against my views. Because you know what? Nietzsche might be right. So I need to make sure I can look at these objections and answer them. Because I might be wrong and need to leave Christianity. All right. Here's an interesting concept you might want to bring up on the discussion board. Rational objectivity versus psychological objectivity. So J.P. Moreland explains in his book Kingdom Triangle, and I taught this at my church years ago with my buddy Mike. It was a great book. It was like a college classroom for 8 weeks at a local coffee shop, Red Tree Art Gallery. But we studied scientific atheism or naturalism, postmodernism, personal theism, with a focus on the Christian variety. Psychological objectivity. If you do not care about the outcome of an investigation. So, personally, I don't care whether or not we discover the Higgs boson particle or not. I just don't care. Rational objectivity, that's if I can be trained well enough in quantum physics where I can evaluate the evidence when they make the claim over there in Switzerland that they discovered the Higgs boson God particle. And can I think objectively about it, even though I'm not psychologically objective about something? Now, in that case, I am psychologically objective. I don't care one way or the other. But, well, let's give some examples. Okay. If you look at this picture on the right, that's my best buddy from first grade. He designed the exterior of the 2008 Camaro, or Bumblebee, if you watch the first Transformers movie. There's his wife. And, yeah, I was the best man at their wedding. Psychologically objective, I care about my buddy. I want him and his wife to flourish and raising their 12 kids. Okay? Now, let's say this. I hear that this guy, my best buddy from first grade, took a chainsaw and chopped up his wife and put her on the grill and served her to the neighbors with hot dogs and baked beans. Now, I'm the guy in the middle. I am not psychologically objective about this. I want my buddy not to be a psycho killer. I want him to be a flourishing, good husband, good dad. So, I'm not psychologically objective. I care about the outcome of this investigation. But the real problem is whether or not I can be rationally objective about the evidence and weigh the evidence for or against my buddy's guilt. So, some people are so blind, so overwhelmed with their lack of psychological objectivity, they can't even listen to the evidence against their views. That's the point. If you watch Investigation Discovery, you'll see that some of these parents, even though their sons and daughters are psychos and have chopped up, multiple people, they still can't believe that their son or daughter is such and such. Yeah, we see that, with a lot of people. We have parents, their children have disabilities, and they cannot weigh the evidence, and so they don't get their child help when they would have benefited if the parent would have been more rationally objective and weighed the evidence. Oh, yeah, you know what? Little Johnny's got some issues here. I'm going to need to take him to a therapist, see what can happen. Instead, they can't even evaluate the evidence. And yes, I've seen this many times with my friends. So this question is important. This question is life or death. This is why philosophy is so important. Throw your thoughts on the discussion board about this. It's a fact that people are murdered because people are not rationally objective in the world. So it's important that we try to find out where we are not rationally objective. So in politics, if you turn on the news, it's a circus. Many people in politics are not rationally objective, even in the media. These reporters and whatnot, they hate President Trump so much that everything he does is wrong and they're against it, even when they should agree with them or actually agreed with them in the past. I mean, some of it is even amusing. So people say Trump should be resisted no matter what he does, even if it's something that you actually think is right. So be wary of there. Same in religion. Some people cannot examine evidence against their religion, and they may be in a worldview or religion that's false and harmful. So right now, on my view, jihadist Islamists do not know the objections against their religious views given by their own prophet, Isa, Jesus, in the Injil Gospels. So yeah, on my view, on Islam, Isa was a true prophet of God. And if you read Surah 9, 111, the end of that, God gave information to the prophet Isa, and he said, love your enemies, turn the other cheek, forgive your enemies, pray for your enemies, take care of the poor. Jesus never said to behead anybody. Jesus never said to kill anybody or murder anybody. So the ethic of Jesus, I think, actually is the cure for the philosophy, the harmful philosophy, the false philosophy of ISIS, that Christians and Jews should be beheaded, and that God hates sinners and the infidel. All right. Look at this book sometime, even if you're not a Christian, especially if you're not a Christian and have been abused by Christians in your family. I would read this book and give this to your pastor or parents who have a dumbed down view of Christianity. Love your God with all your mind. J.P. Moreland, he gives kind of a brief history of how the church got dumb in the last 200 years, and he gives some solutions. Teaches a little logic, reasoning, and gives great verses and how, even if Christianity is false, Jesus, Peter, Paul in the New Testament, they cared about the life of the mind and arguing this stuff to be true. Jesus said, love your God with all your mind. Peter said, be able to give a reason for the hope you have within you. Paul, in 1 Corinthians 15, if this stuff is not true, we're to be pitied to most men. We're the dumbest of dumb. We're dying for this stuff if it's false. All right. 4 major categories: metaphysics, epistemology, logic, ethics. Let's look at metaphysics. Let's get metaphysical. Metaphysical. Let me hear your theory talk. All right. What is reality? What is the nature of reality? What exists? Is the physical universe real? Is everything in the universe physical? Do non-physical immaterial entities exist, like souls and ghosts and love and abstract objects? All right. We're going to be talking about some of these things. We'll talk about second question there, immortality of the soul, free will. All right. Pause it and read this if you want. Robert Solomon. He's a good philosopher. I heard him give a talk once over a decade ago, and enjoyed some beverages with him at Christie's in Cincinnati. So metaphysical issues, properties and substances. Properties are things like height, weight, mass, velocity, and attributes of objects like colors, taste, sounds. So the property of this tree out here, it's got the properties of greenness, brownness, certain mass, okay, certain number of branches, and so on. I have certain properties. I have the property of being 6 feet tall, property of weighing 900 pounds, property of whatever. Substance are things, if they exist, the things that have these properties. So for Aristotle, a bush would be a substance. A human organism would be a substance. So the substance Tuffer has the property of being 6 foot tall. Property of Tuffer has the weight of being 50 kilograms, and so on. All right, metaphysical issues. This bleeds into the philosophy of mind. The soul-body problem or mind-body problem. Are we just our brains or our mental lives? Is consciousness non-physical? Free will and determinism. Are we determined by nature or God, or do we have non-physical souls with this power of free will to introduce new energy into the universe? Death and immortality of the soul. Some philosophers argue death is the number one philosophical issue. So we'll look at Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas' view of the soul, soul's capacities, higher and lower order, when we do Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. All right, if you want to pause it and read this, go ahead. All right, this relates to Plato's cave. So think about this, think about the cave, and so on. We need to ask what could be real. Post your view on the cave. Watch this. Orson Welles reads it. It's kind of a strange animation, but you get the point. So think about these questions and post on the discussion board. Can you imagine the scene in the cave Socrates describes? Sketch a picture of all the elements in the caves. Glaucon says the people in the story are like strange prisoners. Socrates then gives a stunning reply that they are like ourselves. Why do you suppose Socrates compares us to these prisoners? What do the shadows stand for? And according to the story, as far as you can tell, what is enlightenment? So in what sense does the freed prisoner not understand the shadows as well as his friends when he returns to the cave? In what sense does he understand the shadows better than his friends? Who breaks the chains and gets the prisoner out of there? And summarize what philosophical points you think Plato's making in this allegory. All right, these are big questions for your life. You can look at these. The immortality of the soul does matter. Near-death experiences. There's a great book by John Burke called Imagine Heaven, where he gives a lot of cases of these NDEs and a lot of skeptical scientists who change their minds, like Dr. Eben Alexander. So these questions do matter. It does matter if you're a non-physical soul or self, if you have free will, if there's life after death, and so on. Our deeds could echo in eternity. I did love the film Gladiator, where it came out, I don't know, 18 years ago. But, yeah, his view, philosophy of death, his ethics, they played a huge role in concert with one another. So he was living to see his wife and child again in the afterlife. What is my place in the cosmos? Do we matter at all to the universe? Are humans the kind of things that could matter? Are we parts of the natural world? Is there a God who designed human beings? So in this course, we're going to mention some of these debates. We won't be able to treat any of these debates with great depth, but Intro to Philosophy is just to get you thinking and to broach some of these subjects so you can plan a course of study the rest of your life, and I'll help you. If you email me when the class is over, if you want suggestions. All right, Epistemology, the science of knowledge. All right, read these questions in Epistemology. Now, Plato's traditional definition of knowledge is justified true belief, JTB. You have to have a belief. I believe the sun is shining. It has to be true. The sun actually has to be shining. And it has to be justified. I have to have good reasons to believe that my belief about reality is true. The sun is shining. And my justification is I perceive a blue sky. I see sunshine, no clouds. I haven't been taking any hallucinatory drugs lately, so I can trust my senses. They're reliable today, so I thought they were reliable yesterday, so therefore I think I'm justified in believing the sun is shining. Also, I look on my phone, and AccuWeather says no clouds today in Cincinnati, sun is shining. 3 types of knowledge: acquaintance knowledge, propositional know-how. So, acquaintance knowledge, propositional knowledge, let's start with the second one. This is if you read a Hammons manual on how to fix your car, or you can know that Zeus exists, or classes at noon. Acquaintance knowledge, start it. Propositional knowledge. You can read a manual about Dr. Pepper and what it tastes like versus coffee or milk or Sprite. Now, acquaintance knowledge, you get that when you taste a Dr. Pepper for the first time. You have the propositional knowledge of what Dr. Pepper tastes like and the chemical composition of it. Acquaintance knowledge, you actually taste it. Oh, that's what Dr. Pepper is. And you can get know-how. So you can do taste tests. You can sort cans of pop. You could taste Dr. Pepper and be like, oh, this is Dr. Pepper, and put those cans in one bin. You could taste milk and put milk in another bin. Taste Sprite and put Sprite cans in another bin. So I used to have an Acura Integra. Missed that car. All right. Propositional knowledge. That's what I get when I read a book or talk with a friend or a Hammons manual on how to change the brakes on my 96 Acura Integra. I forgot how I had that many miles on it. So, I had the propositional knowledge. I read the Hammons manual 50 times or whatever. Then I go to my buddy's garage and I rip off the wheels and I start changing my brakes and calipers. That's when I get acquaintance knowledge. This is the type of knowledge I get when I actually get down and start changing my brake pads and rotors and calipers. Then, after the fourth one, I actually, or it might take longer or less, I get know-how. I acquired knowledge on how to do this after I change all my brakes. So this skills knowledge or know-how improves the more I change my brakes or work on something or do something. So we can get know-how with regards to philosophy itself. You can learn about philosophy. When you actually start doing philosophy, you can be acquainted with good arguments, bad arguments, and writing good arguments, bad arguments, and then you can get know-how, where you can become a better logician, better epistemologist, better metaphysician. All right, Dallas Willard. This guy's fantastic. I was dreaming about his book last night. This is bizarre. Anyway, he says this: the capacity to represent things as they are on an appropriate basis of thought and experience. So he combines both the empiricists and rationalists for his definition of knowledge. And just for future reference, this philosopher explains Christian theism better than anyone else. And if you've been making a straw man of Christian theism, read his books on Christianity so you can get an understanding of what Jesus was all about. Even if you come down differently than Willard and think Christianity is false, you'll give it a fair shake if you read Willard. You can see him lecture online and so on. All right. We're not going to cover this summer. We might in your class if you're watching this another time other than summer of 2017. Ethics. So ethics in the ancients cared about three things. The good. What should we value? Morality, we'll define these for right now. Rules of right and wrong with regards to other people. Don't steal. Don't commit murder. Don't be mean to people because others are mean to you. 3, character. What should human beings be like? What are virtues? What are good character traits? What are vices? Bad character traits. Virtue, like be honest. Vice, being deceitful, and so on. So, the anthropologist studies the moral codes of various societies and describes both their similarities and differences, but does not decide which ones are best. On the other hand, the philosopher asks, which ethical principles, if any, are the correct ones? How do we decide what's right or wrong? That's quoting William Lawhead. All right. If you take my ethics class, teach it online this fall, we'll go through all these theories and work on them. If we're doing the Euthyphro class, we will talk about the Euthyphro dilemma. That'll be fun. We'll also mention relativism, 2 types of relativism: individual relativism, subjectivism, culture relativism, conventionalism. We'll mention those. Logic. This is just reasoning. So there's deductive logic and inductive logic. I'm teaching deductive logic this fall. If you want to take this, Willard, let's use his definition of reason. He argues that reason is the power to determine by thinking what is the case. So balancing your checkbook, trying to understand your child, determining the cause of the traffic in front of you on the highway, or using reason. Reason is also the capacity to discern necessary connections or hypothetical connections. If such and such, then such and such. So, yeah, we use reason all day long. We rely on philosophy all day long to function. Yeah, there's the best book I've seen explaining Christian theism. We are going to talk about John Stuart Mill, Free Will, Chapter 2 of the Liberty of Thought and Discussion. How you have some people, anybody can do this in a place of power, but many people now are destroying free speech and silencing free speech and arguments. And some on what we call the left are silencing conservative arguments and so on. Now, maybe the left have the best arguments, but they should use rationality and persuasion and not silence people by violence and shaming and calling people racist and homophobic and Islamophobic and bigot, misogynist, and saying I'm offended anytime they hear an opposing argument. So, yeah. We might mention some of this stuff. I'm debating whether or not to throw in inductive reasoning arguments. All right, philosophy of religion. If you want to pause this and read this, go ahead. If you take my philosophy of religion class, we'll look at the best arguments for God's existence. Kalam cosmological argument, which was Islamic argument for God's existence by Al-Ghazali, Al-Kindi, and resurrected in the 1970s by William Lane Craig. You can see his defense of it there at reasonablefaith.org. Robin Collins, fine-tuning design argument from physics. This has convinced the now late Antony Flew, who was a famous atheist, who was famous for an argument against the design argument that was in every philosophy of religion book. He was convinced to believe in God because of this fine-tuning design argument. Arguments from Consciousness or Mind by Richard Swinburne, J.P. Moreland, or noological arguments. Those are interesting. Pragmatic arguments, William James, Blaise Pascal. Then we'll look at the problem of evil, argument against God's existence, possible solutions to it, and different worldviews. Philosophy of science. We're not going to do this summer, but these are some issues that I would normally bring up in an intro class for fun. Political philosophy. So these are questions of how big should the government view. Founding fathers, framers of the Constitution, compared to Marxists or progressives today, they wanted the minimalist state. They wanted tiny government. They wanted more liberty. They wanted individuals to take care of themselves and each other's. They wanted the absolute minimum from government. Nowadays, you have many leadership of the Democrat Party. Actually, most Republicans are big government people that they think government should do everything. Government should tax and take care of the poor. Government should do this, and then we have a positive right to health care, not just a negative right to get health care if we want it. So it's a big debate right now between liberty and, the conservatives, founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution. They saw big government as tyrannical and against and squashing liberty and freedom. Now, Marxist progressives and most Democrats and most Republicans today, they think, no, actually more freedom and more liberty is not just. So the more government, the more redistribution of wealth through health care, through education, and so on. This is just. So even though it's less liberty, it produces a more just society. Framers of the Constitution, they say, that's tyranny, That's a bunch of masterminds deciding things for the rest of us. So government should get out of our lives. Let people do their business. Let people educate themselves. Let people take care of the poor themselves. Jesus commanded individuals to take care of the poor, not government to take care of the poor. And if you're a progressive or Marxist, you disagree, and so on. All right, we're going to talk about civil disobedience when we read the Credo, so that'll be fun. This is important because we have all kinds of civil disobedience today, disobeying the rule of law. So you have all these leakers in 2017 in the vast administrative state, or the fourth branch of government, the bureaucracy. Lots of leaks, breaking the law there. Those are felonies. You have mayors who are breaking federal law with sanctuary cities. You have justices who break the law with their decisions, going against Trump's, temporary immigration, 90-day stay on immigration from those 6 countries or whatever. So it's very interesting. When should you break the law? Should you riot and commit violence and break the law to protest? Or should you just simply use rational argument and peaceful protests? So we'll talk about civil disobedience. Because some people argue the United States is a crisis tipping point where you have secessionists, nullificationists like the Civil War with some of these mayors and justices going rogue and going against the Constitution and rule of law. And with President Obama, who he chose sometimes to exceed his executive authority. The Supreme Court called him out a couple times on it. Sometimes they did not. You be the judge. We're going to quit there. I would recommend the rest of your life, I would get Philosophy for Dummies when this class is over. This is his, Tom Morris's Philosophy 101 class boiled down to this book. It's actually a good resource for this class if you want to get it. It's less than $10 online. Peter Kreeft, he's my favorite Catholic philosopher. I used to use this book in my class. I thought about it now, but he works through Plato's Apology and I think the Credo or Euthyphro, or maybe it's just the Apology in this, but I used to use that with students. Check out Willard, check out Moreland, and you be the judge. I've got some lectures online for this course, but yeah, anytime after this course is over, email me questions, book suggestions, saying, hey, I'm exploring Buddhism. Can you give me your favorite book on Buddhism? And I'll send you a couple titles or whatever. ChristopherHammons.com, that's going to change. We're going to be piphilosophy.com. We'll launch our new website this summer. This was Istanbul, Turkey in 2013. If anybody cares. Alrighty. I forgot. This stuff. Alright. The end. Okay, this is tougher. I don't know how to stop this. This is the first time using active preventer in a long time.